Mikola seems to be a very pivotal character that we haven't really gotten too many details about just yet. I'm gonna guess that in this video we're probably gonna learn a bit more about him, although there may be some more information that we learned from the new DLC that just came out, which likely isn't gonna be here in this video, so I guess I'll probably have to check a more updated version later on, once I have the basics down. Before we begin, please head down to the description. There should be a link to the original video. Go and subscribe to Vati, who has done an incredible job at compiling all this Elden Ring lore in a very consumable format. If you'd like to watch the original video, obviously go and check out his version. I will be pausing in order to commentate over things and potentially make some theories here and there.
Mikola is many things. A fundamentalist, the unalloyed, creator of the Halig Tree, Lord of the Eclipse, Saint Trina of the Cradle Song, and not just a demigod, but a fearsome Empyrean who has been captured but is unresponsive for now. And after watching this video, I think you'll agree that Mikola is a topic that almost has to be explored further in some upcoming DLC. For how
well, there you go.
Could they not be? Their character is surely too major, too foreshadowed, and too intriguing to just ignore. So, let's learn everything that there is to know.
Born afflicted.
For starters, Mikola is the demigod child of Queen Marika and King Consort Radagon, who, as I'm sure you're well aware at this point, are the same being. You can learn more about the timeline of events from my other videos, but basically, after Radagon left Renala, the Academy told Radagon to go fuck himself, basically. But Radagon took that literally,
yeah, pretty much.
And he signed a third set of demigod children all on his own, who were the twins Mikola and Malenia. These children appear to be represented by the butterfly items in the game, and the nascent butterfly appears to represent Mikola. Its description elaborates on his state of eternal childhood, stating that
I think there was something about a butterfly appearing in the DLC trailer. I haven't watched that yet because I'd like to have a basis of the lore, so maybe I can make some theories about it. It's gonna be a bit too late since the DLC. I mean, is it out already? I haven't really checked or been keeping up with it. But regardless, I think it would just be a fun experience to try and come up with something, you know?
It appears as if it's just emerged from its cocoon for its entire life. Indeed, the word nascent means that something is just coming into existence and beginning to display signs of future potential. And that nascence is eternal for Mikola, and I think that this eternal nascence is incredibly important for his character. For Mikola and Malenia both seem to occupy different sides of the life and death cycle. That's not to say that Mikola represents life and Malenia represents death, rather it seems like both land.
I mean, from what I know, Malenia does represent death for a lot of players of Elden Ring who have yet to beat her.
And somewhere in the middle of each process, Malenia is constantly resisting her scarlet rot and is in this perpetual state of dying, and Mikola is in this constant state of nascence. He is newly born and showing an abundance of life and burgeoning potential. Special thanks to Quailag for making this clear to me. So Mikola is nascent, but he's also...
I've seen you guys recommend some videos from Quailag as well. Whenever we do more deeper dives into the lore, I'll definitely check them out, but I think after this I'll likely have to go check out Vati's series of, it was called Prepare to Cry or something like that.
Also abundant, and I think that's another extremely key word for him. For example, there's this cut weapon called the Abundance and Decay Twin Blade, which symbolizes the twins and suggests that the twins were born from an inseparable fate and hold the runes of both abundance and decay between them. Not to mention, the word abundance is also literally spoken by Mikola in his cut content, and thanks to a very recent discovery by Sekiro Dubi, we know this cut dialogue I'm about to voice is Mikola speaking. And here he appears to be leading you towards a unique ending for the game, and he talks about his ability to make life flourish, stating, "This is for thee, mine abundance, my drop of dew, quench thy thirst throughout thy frame, blossom and burgeon, time and again, grow larger, stronger, until the day cometh, when thou canst share in my dream. Elden Ring, O Elden Ring, beget order most elegant from my tender reverie. And before I go on, I do want to say that Miquella talking about his abundance is cut content, and you shouldn't really take it as canon, but I think it does give us a deeper look at not only the powers that Miquella might have had, but also the world that he could create. He goes on.
I feel like it's more of a good way to see the possible direction that Miquella's character was going in, rather than it being like an absolute canon. It could be that they cut the content in order to flesh it out more, do it in a different direction in the DLC though.
To say, if thou covetest the throne, impress my vision upon thine heart. In the new world of thy making, all things will flourish, whether graceful or malign. And I love that final line, all things will flourish, whether graceful or malign, because Miquella isn't enforcing any real notions of good or evil here. Instead, in the new world of his making, he simply wants all things to flourish, and I feel like that is a very unique viewpoint for a character in a Souls game. Not to mention, Miquella is certainly one of the few beings that is capable of creating this new world. That's because he is an Empyrean. He is one of the very few who were candidates chosen by the Two Fingers to succeed Queen Marika and become a god, to usher in a new age. Now, we could go into an entire debate about why the twins are valid Empyreans and why they were born afflicted, but honestly, that could almost be an entire video of its own, so for now I'll just give the simple answer, which is that these twins were probably valid Empyreans because they have singular parentage from a god, but that this singular parentage was probably also responsible for their afflictions as well, due to the almost incestual implications of such a thing.
I mean, I can't even make a joke about this on YouTube. I guess you could call this like morbid curiosity, but I am kind of curious to know how that actually happened. I mean, as a god, I suppose when you birth children, it's not going to be through any normal process, that's for sure. Although, Radagon was married to Renala, and I don't know how that happened. They did have children, so what was the process there? It's probably not important.
Why do I feel like it was George R.R. Martin that wrote this part?
I wonder why.
Anyway, let's move into the early childhood years of Miquella's eternal childhood. Miquella's early years were clearly quite inspired by their father, Radagon, who fostered a bit of a fundamentalist streak in his prodigal son, and Miquella would go on to invent fundamentalist incantations of his own, dubbed Discus of Light and Triple Rings of Light, which he gave as gifts to his father. These gifts reveal that Radagon and Miquella had a good relationship, and Radagon must have been proud of his son because these two spells do represent those two key fundamentals of the Golden Order, namely that there is a law of causality, which is a branching cause and effect that goes outwards, but also that there is a law of regression, that all things yearn eternally to converge once again. And in gratitude, Radagon countered with a gift of his own, showing Miquella Radagon's Rings of Light. These incantations would go on to become core fundamentalist spells, as they are true to those two concepts that form the basis of the Golden Order. But there is another aspect of Golden Order fundamentalism, and that is the persecution of those who live in death. Hunters of these undead would attempt to stamp them out with spells such as Order's Blade and Litany of Proper Death, which deal additional damage against those who live in death and prevent them from resurrecting. To recap, those who live in death exist because of Godwyn the Golden, who was one of the early sons of Marika and Godfrey, who was eventually killed with a fragment of the Rune of Death, and then the Rune of Death would eventually spread its undeath throughout the lands between via Deathroot.
That was in the opening cinematic of the game, right? I believe that was Godwyn that was killed there?
And there is an entire debate that we could have here about whether the persecution of those who live in death is even true to the core principles of fundamentalism. Goldmask certainly doesn't seem to think so. In fact,
Praise the
according
sun?
to the Order healing spell, Goldmask laments the hunters of those who live in death, deeming them to be fanatics who wanted nothing more than an absolute evil to contend with. And the reason I bring up this debate at all...
It's like cradling a child. Wait, is that supposed to represent Michaela? Or I think it's pronounced Mikola. I don't know why I changed the pronunciation there.
Is because you could argue that Mikola was on the side of these fanatic hunters, as he created multiple weapons that were capable of effectively slaying those who live in death. For example, this is Golden Epitaph, and it is a sword that was made to commemorate the death of Godwyn the Golden, first of the demigods to die.
So cool?
It is infused with the humble prayer of a young boy and reads, "O brother, Lord brother,
I wonder who the
please
young boy
die a
is.
true death." So this weapon is an effective tool of killing those who live in death permanently, and clearly the young boy who created it was Mikola. We can infer this because the sigil that appears when you use this blade's skill is the Halig Tree sigil. And once activated, this ability, called Last Rites, imbues the sword with a holy power that prevents those who live in death from reviving. But beyond this being a potential tool to slay those who live in death, is that this weapon points towards an early kinship between Mikola and Godwyn, a relationship that might have made it all the more painful when Godwyn's soul would perish, but his body would remain, spawning Deathroot. This is interesting, as it gives Mikola a legitimate emotional grievance against those who live in death. And it's almost a bit hypocritical, I think, for what I believe to be Mikola's character, as we previously established that he might have been this character who wants all life to flourish, but I guess that principle might not extend to those who live in death for him. This sword might not be the only representation of Mikola's...
I mean, isn't everybody a little hypocritical sometimes? Or rather, everybody's very hypocritical. I mean, even if you're like a god or a demigod, you probably have some things that just don't align. I'm trying to think of a particular reason why. Could it be that, you know, he wants everything to flourish, but things that have already passed on should pass on, kind of like that? Like, live your life to the fullest, and then when you die, actually, you know, die and rest in peace, rather than roaming the land forevermore? We've previously talked about, you know, how people view death in this universe and how some see it as a new way to gain power, or how new life is born from death, or, you know, how there is really no death because the Ur tree kind of takes your soul and then you just stay there forever. So I wonder if Mikola shared any of these views, or if he had his own vision of how the universe should be. Because he was also kind of like fostering his own tree, and with the cut content and obviously the DLC that just came out, which I don't know the details of, there could be a new ending to the game that has more to do with Mikola's vision of what he wants.
His relationship with Godwyn. That relationship is potentially strengthened even more when we consider this statue found in Elfale before the Halig Tree. It depicts a larger figure who is clearly embracing the two Empyrean twins, Mikola and Melania. But then, who is this larger figure?
Yeah.
It could be their parent,
Godwyn?
Marika or Radigan.
Marika?
But then it doesn't have their signature hair braid, and instead it has this long, wavy hair. What's more, the statue asset is flat-chested, which appears to rule out Marika, at least. And after reading a good amount of debate online about this, I think it's a fair conclusion to say that this statue represents Godwyn, who himself does seem to have long, wavy hair. And this statue being enshrined here really tells a story. It's a story of two gifted but afflicted siblings who were supported by their older brother, but then they were left alone, as their older brother would become the first demigod to die.
Oh, then maybe this directly ties into why Mikola wants, you know, the undead to be put to rest forever. Perhaps as a form of, I guess, to avenge or redeem? I guess it depends on your perspective. Their older brother, who was unfortunately slain.
And this isn't the only statue in this location. Far more prominent in the area are these statues, which depict two siblings left alone after their brother died. There was one sibling, Mikola, who was forced to remain as a young child, and another who grew up in great pain, eventually losing vision
slowly rotting
limbs
away
to rot and decay. These statues are everywhere in the Halig tree, and they tell that sorrowful story. They are an early sign of Mikola's extreme empathy for his sister, and they foreshadow his desperate attempts to give her relief from her terrifying condition. And so the young Mikola abandoned fundamentalism, for it could do nothing to treat Melania's accursed rot. This was the beginning of unalloyed gold. So, what is unalloyed gold? Well, an alloy is something that's created when you combine metals, usually because you want to create a stronger compound at the expense of its purity. So, if we were to view Marika's Golden Order as if it were a metal, which I think is something that the law wants you to do considering the implications of the tarnished and everything like that, then Marika's Golden Order would definitely be an alloyed metal. Just think of all the foreign powers that it's absorbed in the interest of strength. For example, Godfrey and his Crucible Knights were enlisted to devastate Marika's enemies. The ancient dragons were won over and eventually became a part of Laendel's forces. Even the House of the Erd Tree and the Moon were married at one point. Literally. After all, as Muriel puts it, all things can be conjoined under the Golden Order, so I think Marika was definitely open to fusing factions and ideologies to an extent, as long as it made her treasured Golden Order alloy stronger. So hopefully now you understand what I mean when I say that Mikola's gold is unalloyed. It is pure, it is untainted, and it is perhaps a singular ideology. And
then this probably ties into Mikola's view of things and how it differs from Marika's view of things, and how his Erd Tree could have potentially turned out. I mean, considering the things that Marika has done in order to create this alloyed metal of a Golden Order, I can't really say if one is better than the other, and I feel like that's just going to be a common theme throughout really all Dark Souls games. There likely isn't going to be like a good choice or the best choice. There's probably going to be some debate about it. I guess this is really the type of thing that you have to play the game, and with whatever you experience in-game and how you feel about certain characters or certain ideologies is likely going to lead you to believe in a particular ending and attempt to achieve that. If you're not like, just following a guide and trying to get all the endings just to see them.
If you subscribe to the idea that the cut content is still representative of Mikola, then I would say that his ideology is what I had Mikola quote earlier, that in his new world, all things should be allowed to flourish, whether graceful or malign, and that is his pure ideology.
Everything has a fair chance.
That is my speculation based on cut content as well, so please keep that in mind. But Mikola's unalloyed gold couldn't have just been this metaphysical concept of pure ideology. It was a physical material as well. For example, this is an unalloyed gold water lily, said to have been beloved by Mikola. This is a bewitching branch, blessed with an incantation of unalloyed gold. Unalloyed gold decorated the armor and shields of his soldiers. It was inserted into their weapons, and most importantly, perhaps, it was forged into a set of armor for his sister, Melania. Because, remember, the whole reason Mikola embraced unalloyed gold in the first place, it seems, was because he thought that it could treat his sister's accursed rot, while fundamentalism could not. And he was right, for Melania's scarlet rot is no mere disease. It's literally the divine essence of an outer god, and Melania is its vessel that will one day bloom into a true goddess. But unalloyed gold is one of the few materials in the game that can ward away such meddling of the outer gods. Another example are the mirror helms, like the one that Iji wears, which literally reflects the influence of the outer gods. And personally, I think the reason that unalloyed gold inhibits the meddling of the outer gods is because it is a pure metal and potentially a pure ideology. But if that's not enough reason for you, then Quelaag actually has a great video where she breaks down potential reasons at a chemical level. But at any rate,
that's actually insane. Oh god. Dude, imagine trying to like come up with all of this as the writer. Yeah, it's because of the metal composition that makes it so that the outer gods don't affect your mind. But in a way, I'm also not really surprised that it goes down to that, extremely small detail. Because of, well, all the things that we've seen so far, and the fact that there's so many references to alchemy as well.
Reasons aside, Miquella crafted needles of unalloyed gold, which could be inserted into the tortured flesh of one afflicted by rot to alleviate their suffering and forestall the effects of the rot. And true to the needle's descriptions, the outer god of rot isn't the only one affected by this. Our character actually uses the final version of this unalloyed gold needle to subdue the outer god of frenzy, which is something you might want if you decided to be a terrible person and burn down the world. Anyway, when we first find Miquella's needle, it's been broken, snapped in half, and picked up by a commander at the very center of the Scarlet Swamp. But once this needle has been prepared, we can give the golden needle to Millicent, proving that it does indeed work to forestall the rotting sickness.
I see. I remember this character because of Maxor's video. It was a very different joke in that video, but I didn't know that you actually gave them a needle.
Remove pain and nightmares from the afflicted. It is, after all, lovingly crafted by Miquella himself.
Well, this
Abundance,
is a marvel indeed. The work of a true artisan, a meticulous, bold craftsman who grasps the essence of life.
In crafting these needles and pursuing unalloyed gold, Miquella is attempting to save his sister from her affliction. It seems like this objectively good deed, which is a rare sight in Elden Ring, especially for a demigod whose strengths have been known to tip them towards madness, and that is what makes Miquella such a pure and likable character in Elden Ring. So it's no wonder really that Melania venerated her brother. She is a character of undefeated prowess, and she's an Empyrean, no less. And yet, she dedicated her blade to Miquella, and Miquella alone, for she believes that he possesses the wisdom, the allure of a god, and that he is the most fearsome Empyrean of all. The story of their bond and duty to one another is legendary, and that's something that becomes quite clear when we explore Miquella's Halig tree and see these statues depicting their embrace all around. And if you were one of the many defiled outcasts in Elden Ring, you too might have felt inspired by this story, and you might have felt inclined to earn Miquella's favor and make the long pilgrimage towards your salvation, towards the distant divine Halig tree and its brace that was Miquella's domain.
You really have to admire the dedication that they have for each other, these siblings. I suppose that dedication also grew even stronger when Godwyn died, because once Godwyn was gone, they only had each other. Although, of course, there was a third sibling, apparently, but don't know their story just yet. And while the structure of their relationship isn't really, unique, I mean, there are plenty of other media out there where there's like an older brother or sister who is completely devoted to the protection of their younger sibling because they feel as if they are better than them as like a person or an individual. In this case, a god. But it's really the circumstances surrounding that relationship that make this kind of stand out, and even just hearing about it, you kind of feel for them. And I can't imagine what it would be like to slowly uncover this when you're playing the game.
So first, what even is the Halig tree? Well, it's pretty obvious that it's a sort of Erd tree. For one, Erd tree avatars have clearly emerged from it, which they only do in order to protect the Erd tree's own offspring. And then there's the Halig tree knight armor, which confirms that the Halig tree ultimately failed to grow into an Erd tree. And one thing I've been wondering is, when exactly was the Halig tree planted then? If we knew when, then we might be able to guess at its purpose. Was it planted before or after the shattering of the Elden Ring? Because when the Elden Ring was shattered, golden seeds flew from the Erd tree, scattering across the various lands as if life itself knew that its end had come. These seeds create these little illusory trees and likely spawned the minor Erd trees as well, so I think it's a fair assumption that Miquella might have planted the Halig tree from an Erd tree seed. And if that was indeed the case, then it should have happened after the shattering, for before that, the Erd tree was considered perfect and eternal, and it wasn't even believed that Erd tree seeds could exist.
Oh yeah, that's right. It was only after, as well as death became a possibility for it, that it decided to release its seeds. And yeah, the logic does track, like, why would you want to even plant another Erd tree if there's already the perfect Erd tree?
But on the flip side, the golden epitaph sword that we mentioned earlier likely existed before the shattering, as it was created to commemorate Godwyn's death, and this sword displays the Halig tree sigil when its weapon art is activated, so
strange.
One could infer that the Halig tree must have existed at this point too, right? So I guess it's always possible that Miquella somehow procured an Erd tree seed before the shattering, or simply grew it from his own being, as he is a scion of the Golden Bough after all. But whatever the case, Miquella clearly decided that growing such a tree was important, and he even went so far as to water it with his own blood. This confirms that the Erd tree is indeed a blood-sucking parasite. Just kidding. Sort of. I mean, you have to admit, it is pretty disturbing that an Erd tree could flourish in such a manner. But this does lead us to the final question, which is, why was the Halig tree planted?
Right?
What was the point of it?
What is its purpose?
And at the end of the day, the main reason is always going to be because it's like the Erd tree. It's natural to compare them, and the item descriptions seem to want you to compare them as well. The Erd tree is this enormous icon of power and faith in the lands between, so evoking that and inspiring worship is clearly a valuable thing. But the Erd tree was only really an icon of faith in its later years. Before that, it was a symbol of abundance, with light as warm as the gentle sun that could gradually heal all those who bathed in its rays. But perhaps most importantly, during this time of abundance, it would drip sacred dew, sap or tears that could bestow blessings, form crystal tears, and even be embedded into talismans. These were treasured things, and naturally, this was an extremely valuable symbol for Miquella to evoke, since he is himself associated with dew and abundance in the cut content. And his Halig tree did drip with dew. The greenish amber of the Halig tree can even be seen in cut content items. It even looks as if it's mingled with a bit of Miquella's own blood. And that signature green hue of Halig tree amber is also seen in the Halig tree knight sword, which is not a cut weapon, and this was modeled after the Carrion knight's own swords, except it was embedded with amber from the Halig tree instead of glintstone. Okay, so the Halig tree is a great symbol of faith and power and abundance, and Miquella is related to abundance in the cut content, but what else does the Halig tree add in terms of value? Well, the Halig tree itself is something of a vessel, fit for a god. Miquella plants himself inside it later on. Melania returns home to it, and speaking of it being a home, many other creatures have made their home within the tree, and within the brace that supports it as well. And I guess you could also argue that the Halig tree might be a sort of a tool to be used. After all, Marika puts the Erd tree to use in such a way, using its roots to absorb people after their death, and perhaps even its branches to rebirth life.
As a sign of worship, faith, potentially to represent Miquella's ideology, and any of those who wish to follow him in his unalloyed order, I suppose, would find the Halig tree as their sanctuary. So I don't know if he had any intentions of like competing with the Erd tree itself, but it could just be that he wanted to do his own thing a little bit and have his own small space where he could, I guess, incubate himself, if that you could even describe it as that when he got planted in the tree. But yeah, those are just some pretty loose theories from me at the moment. I should probably just continue watching.
And then the Ode Tree is later used as a prison, with thorns that are almost entirely impenetrable. But I don't think Miquella planned to use the Halig Tree in such a way. Perhaps the biggest difference between the Halig Tree and the Ode Tree is that the Halig Tree was built in a largely inhospitable region. It is extremely difficult to reach, and unlike the Ode Tree, it might not really be designed for the benefit of the vast majority of the world. As it stands, the Halig Tree strikes me as being more like the Painted World from Dark Souls. It's a place for the outcasts, the heretical, and the malign, not to mention the low and the meek, who are specifically named in the description of the Sacred Crown Helm. While many of these...
So yeah, it's more of a sanctuary kind of thing.
Scarlet Rot Afflicted seem to be here because of the eventual decay of the Halig Tree. I think that there are a number of refugees here that would have been here before that, namely the Misbegotten, the Crystallian, these astray mages of Raya Lucaria, and of course Loretta, who deemed this place to be a great haven for the despised Albinaurics. The second generation Albinaurics even carry a weapon called the Ivory Sickle, which reads, "These weapons are evidence of their dedication to the Halig Tree, despite never having entered its presence." And we really don't find a single Albinauric within the Halig Tree. I'll admit, I do find this a bit strange. You do find quite a few Albinaurics so close to the Halig Tree. It's a bit strange to me they don't go just that little bit further.
Yeah.
The reason given for the first generation of Albinaurics not being at the Halig Tree is given by Albus, who says that their faded legs are the reason for that. But yeah, we find them defending Miquella and his Halig Tree all the same at the Ordina liturgical town, which takes us to the Halig Tree via a puzzle within an Everjail. The word liturgical means relating to public worship, and this town is fittingly filled with many statues of Miquella sitting alone, cradling what might have become the Halig Tree back when it was still just a sapling. I also find it interesting that the Halig Tree is never called out as competing with the Ode Tree, or never called out for housing all these undesirables. Perhaps...
I mean, you would think with how gung-ho the Golden Order was that it would be a big no-no, but I mean, I guess Miquella was just probably special.
Perhaps the House of the Ode Tree was happy to see ungraceful folk leave their lands. Perhaps the Halig Tree was extremely well hidden from everyone and they didn't know. Or perhaps Miquella could just get away with it because he was beloved by all. For example, the Bewitching Branch is an item that you can create from Miquella's lilies, and it is blessed with an incantation of unalloyed gold and reads, "The Empyrean Miquella is loved by many people."
Wait a minute. I think there was something about this much earlier in one of Vaati's videos where Vaati suggested that potentially Miquella being beloved by everybody was a bit more sinister than it appeared otherwise. Could it be because Miquella had some sort of power to charm people? Are you telling me that this wholesome relationship between these two siblings might not actually be in a wholesome relationship, but completely manipulated by Miquella this entire time? Or maybe I'm jumping the gun here. Who knows? Well, the devs do, and probably Vaati.
Indeed, he has learned very well how to compel such affection. And that second part that says he has learned how to compel affection, to me that's saying that Miquella is very good at knowing how to inspire others' affection to his own advantage.
Yeah.
And nowhere is this more clear, I think, than at Castle Sol.
Lord Miquella of the Eclipse?
This is the Halig Tree Secret Medallion. It's furnished with that signature green amber, and it features the Halig Tree in the background, for it allows you to access a secret lower level of the Grand Lift of Rold and progress through the consecrated snowfields to this sacred place. Having both halves of this secret medallion is therefore extremely desirable, for the medallion has another name. It's called Miquella's Favor.
Miquella's favor can be yours. Slaughter. Slaughter.
What?
Slaughter. The all-hearing slaughtered. But alas, it was for naught. But all you need do is snatch it from the big pot.
Gideon is the all-hearing man in this dialogue, and he slaughtered an entire village just for one half of this medallion, but he did not find it in Albus's possession. But you can. And the other half is at Castle Sol, right before a nameless phantom who says this: Lord Mikola, forgive me. The sun has not been swallowed. Our prayers were lacking. Your comrade remains soulless. I will never set my eyes upon it now. Your divine Halig tree.
What?
So this phantom seemingly has, or I guess had,
maybe he
one
should
half
look down.
of the medallion.
Oh no. Oh god, you know that they did this intentionally.
And yet he laments that he will now never set eyes upon the Halig tree. To me, this suggests that Mikola might have been withholding the second half of the medallion from him, or that this phantom believed that he could solicit the second half of the medallion from Mikola and make it to the Halig tree if he achieved his goal here at Castle Sol and basically earned Mikola's favor.
Whatever his
What
goal
exactly
was.
was supposed to happen here at Castle Sol?
Yeah.
What does it mean when the phantom says, the sun has not been swallowed, our prayers were lacking, your
The sun has not been swallowed. Does it have something to do with, Ronnie's goal? The moon? We gotta destroy the sun? I don't know. I mean, that's not exactly Ronnie's goal, but you probably get what I mean.
comrade remains soulless? It means, I think, that the residents of
Eleni?
Castle Sol and Mikola were attempting to restore the dead soul of Godwin the Golden. And just to
Godwin,
refresh your memory,
of course.
when a fragment of the Rune of Death was used to kill Godwin, it was also being used at the exact same time to kill Rani, and since they perished at the same time, Rani lost her
Rani
body,
also died,
and
yeah.
Mikola's demigod brother, Godwin, perished in soul alone. And despite this death seeming so final, Mikola clearly believes that some sort of ritual performed here could restore the soul of his comrade. For example, here's some more dialogue from a different phantom that reads, O great sun, frigid sun of soul, surrender yourself to the eclipse, grant life to the soulless bones. But the question is how? How does that work? How does an eclipse restore life to Godwin? Now, you can just take Mikola at face value and trust that he knows what he's doing, or we can try to learn as much as we can about the eclipse and see if we can reason out the mechanism behind.
Oh, that's a symbol of an eclipse. A sun being blocked by the moon, yeah. Also, horrible flashbacks to the eclipse from Berserk. Every single time an eclipse is mentioned. I mean, there are a lot of beliefs around eclipses, whether throughout several different cultures of what exactly happens, like a witching hour, I don't know. This is the time where you can talk to the souls of the departed, or, there's a lot, but I don't know what we're going for here exactly.
This process. So at Castle Sol, we find the Eclipse Shotel, which reads, Storied sword and treasure of Castle Sol that depicts an eclipsed sun drained of color. In Sol, the sight of an eclipse inspires a dreadful awe, preventing an onlooker from averting his gaze. The most important part of this description, though, is the part that says it's the storied sword of Castle Sol, as this proves that the veneration of the eclipse here goes back a long way. But what does an eclipse represent? So, according to the Eclipse Crest Shields, the eclipsed sun, drained of color, is the protective star of soulless demigods. Honestly, I think calling it a protective star is kind of the closest we come to understanding the mechanism here, because you could reason that a protective star might be a sort of outer god that lends them power, though.
We've seen a failed star. I think the exact term was malformed star during the episode that had to do with cosmic sorcery and stuff. So I guess you could describe the sun as being that. And really, whenever it comes to anything in the sky, you should probably just look at it as some sort of eldritch being or outer god.
That is just speculation. The description
That's from my
goes on to
understanding
say
anyways.
that the sun in eclipse is said to be the symbol of the wandering mausoleum where the soulless demigods slumber. So note that it says demigods plural here. Now, this could be because the wandering mausoleums come to house many demigods from a gameplay point of view, because you can take their remembrances here. But it could be a word that is slightly lost in translation, as the Japanese version of the word demigods does not specify whether it's a plural or whether it's a singular word. So my take on this is that I think the wandering mausoleums became necessary when Godwin died. I think that the mausoleum was intended to be a resting place for him initially, but then also for any future demigods, as all of a sudden all of their true deaths had become possible as well, with the theft of a fragment of the Rune of Death. The Mausoleum Knights themselves are these headless soldiers who behead themselves, willingly following their master into death. As such, they become these headless spirits, tied to the land so that they might better defend the walking mausoleums. They also carry eclipse-crested shields, and the eclipse is said to aid the Mausoleum Knights by keeping destined death at bay. It is their symbol, and by keeping destined death at bay, maybe it's helping to keep their souls tied to the land. We could speculate for a long time on how the eclipse has this power, and I've done my best. Maybe other people have a better take on it, and maybe you guys do in the comments, but in the end, it's simpler just to trust that Miquella knew what he was doing with the eclipse at Castle Sol, where he wanted to block out the sun and restore Godwin's soul.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of just trust in Miquella going on here. He probably did know what he was doing, but I would like a better breakdown, and I'm still super sus of the fact that he was loved by everybody.
Well, that said, we can't trust him too much, I guess, because it's important to remember that this ritual failed. According to this phantom, the sun was not swallowed. I guess the protective star of the soulless demigods did not listen to their prayers.
The eclipse did
not appear. But it is really fascinating to learn that such a thing might even be possible. That Godwin, whose soul seems to be as dead as Rani's body, might actually not be. So if his soul is somewhere, then where has it fled to? A part of me wonders, if his soul is lost, then maybe it's lost within a dream. One theory I did come up with regarding the mechanism by which Godwin's soul is brought back by the eclipse is that his soul might be brought back by bringing about a sort of artificial dusk with the eclipse. That's because those who live in death are called the Duskborn, after all, so there is an association between night and death, to be sure. And there's also an association between death and sleep. For example, when you pursue Fia's questline, you use her as a medium to enter Godwin's deathbed dream, which is an entire dreamscape where the dragon Fortisax is futilely fighting against the death in his companion. And then there's Roger, who speaks this line of dialogue as he is on the precipice of succumbing to Deathroot.
Maybe I should tell you. Lately, I feel I'm on the precipice of falling into a deep, fathomless slumber.
He does say he's about to fall into sleep. So, in conclusion, a realm of death does seem accessible through dream, and I think this is the perfect time to mention that Miquella has an alter ego. Some say she is a comely young girl. Others are sure he is a boy. This is where we have to talk about the enigmatic figure named Saint Trina.
Okay, I have no idea who this is. Have they
Perhaps
ever been mentioned?
The biggest in-game clue about Saint Trina's true identity is Trina's lily, which bears this undeniable resemblance to Miquella's lily of unalloyed gold. Its description reveals that it is a symbol of faith in Saint Trina, dulls the senses, preventing agitation. Naturally, it can be used to craft a bunch of sleep-afflicting items like Saint Trina's arrow, which states that the sweet oblivion of sleep can become quite the habit, and it tells of the priests of Saint Trina who use these arrows to spread their teachings, though the Japanese description seems to specify that these were more of a tool used for their rituals. So It's largely left to your imagination as to what rituals these priests might have been performing, though I will mention that it seems Saint Trina might actually be able to be found somewhere within sleep. This is suggested by Feather's cookbook, which reads, "A record of crafting techniques left by a man who was utterly captivated by Saint Trina. He continued the search for her in his slumber." We get a side profile of her in the hilt of Saint Trina's sword, which hints at that flowing, astray hair that she has, and then we get a much better front-on view of this feminine adult form.
Does she have a third eye?
Saint Trina's torch. The carvings depict Saint Trina, but in adult form, somewhat unnervingly. The carving is indeed unnerving, and it's certainly strange considering Miquella is supposed to be eternally a child.
Yeah.
It raises the question, what has to happen for Miquella to grow up into this? And why is this bizarre creature the adult form that he takes?
Is this potentially the end result of the DLC? Maybe this is something that Miquella hopes to achieve someday. I mean, I believe Vaati described Trina as an alter ego of sorts. With the physical form that is always a child, this could potentially be Miquella's actual form locked away in a dreamscape. Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't expecting that some sort of dreamscapes to be introduced into the lore here, but I guess I shouldn't be surprised.
A question worth asking, I think, is whether Miquella even has total control of Saint Trina. What if he's in a similar situation to Marika Radigan, where their alter ego is an opposite of sorts, and able to act almost as if they have their own free will?
Well, there you go. I almost completely forgot about that. Is this just a common occurrence that there's two of you for all these gods? I guess so. But then this also mirrors like Marika's situation, and then she has her Erdtree, and then Miquella has his Erdtree, but then also has his alter ego. Although Radigan was kind of just walking around, and even in this world, this lady seems to be just trapped. Well, I don't know if she's trapped or if she's just... Does she even exist? Lots of questions.
So, all of this is definitely a little bit of a disturbing view of what Saint Trina could be, but I guess we do have cut content that does somewhat reassure me that their alter ego is still a benevolent person. This cut content was first showcased by Sekido Dubi, and this cut content is truly ancient. It exists in one of the oldest versions of the game that we know about, so a lot has probably changed since then, but regardless, here we can learn about Saint Trina's crystal ball, which once read, "A crystal ball full of mist, symbol of Saint Trina of the Cradle Song, copies dream mist from a sleeping being. Dream mist was once used as an ingredient in rare and potent physics. May the quietude of slumber come to all and sundry, even to those whose red eyes burn with the flames of frenzy." So this reveals that this cut version of Saint Trina even once had sympathy for those afflicted by the flame of frenzy. They even went so far as to teach the merchants their songs.
Our song derives from an old lullaby, sung for us long ago, deep inside our tomb. But whoever it was sings no longer. Its melody allowed us to sleep, despite the cursed flame.
The description of Miquella's songs as a lullaby is referenced by the modern-day sleep pot description, which reads, "Like a lullaby or a quagmire, its light purple haze irresistibly draws its victims down into sleep. Sweet dreams." This is the closest thing we have to Dream Mist as well, which was an item that you could again once collect from sleeping enemies. And after you did this, you were supposed to sell this Dream Mist to the merchants, who used it to quell their flame of frenzy. But as the merchants once said, whoever it was that sings now sings no longer, and this is a detail that has remained intact even in the final version of Elden Ring, with Saint Trina's sword stating that Saint Trina's appearance was as sudden as their disappearance. Something clearly happened to Miquella that prevented them from continuing their work as Saint Trina, and that is what we will discuss next.
Okay, cool. What could have happened?
At some point, Mikola embedded himself into the Halig tree. Why he did this is never explicitly stated, but I think we can make a good attempt at puzzling it out. So, Mikola famously watered the Halig tree with his own blood, since it was a sapling.
Yeah.
So, I guess you could argue that he embedded himself in it to simply feed the tree more, which I guess is possible because the tree does eventually wither without Mikola inside it, and Gideon seems to tie his removal with the death of the Halig tree, or it turning into a husk. But I don't think that can be the only reason why he embedded himself.
Yeah,
for
I think
instance,
there's something
look
more.
closely at the Halig tree roots, and you'll see the form of a tree-like woman, and where her womb should be,
Saint
there's
Trina?
a gap. A gap that once contained Mikola's cocoon, cradled by the Halig tree. Now, either Mikola was attempting to fuse into and become this woman-like figure, who might even be the adult form shown on Saint Trina's torch, or there was a rebirth occurring here. This is a cocoon within
Attempted
a womb,
rebirth.
after all, so rebirth.
So it was like an incubation chamber. Maybe, potentially, because this is Mikola, right? And he was removed from the tree. And I think this is in Moog's boss fight, yeah?
Could have been the intent here, but regardless, it seems things ended prematurely, for Mikola would eventually be ripped out of the womb and the Halig tree would split and decay. And so, when we arrive at the Halig tree and the town of Elfale that is built into the brace that supports it, the music here hits extremely hard. This place is just so sorrowful. For the Halig tree and Mikola's lilies and even Saint Trina's lilies are all wilting, and all who live.
Then why does Melania still protect that place? I guess in honor of her brother? Like, how did Mikola end up there and got ripped out of the trees, even if Melania is protecting him? Like, Melania of all people. But yeah, with this knowledge, I feel like there's some potential here where Mikola was always supposed to be reborn as, the older adult version, if you could even call it that. But once again, I don't know why. Potentially to escape this old child body?
Here are just hoping and praying for their lord to return. I love the little detail of the guards looking outwards and sitting dejectedly. To make matters worse for them, it was here that they realized that the sacred light inside them would explode upon their imminent deaths, and yet, in spite of this, their spirit ashes show their faith and state, "May the flash of our deaths guide Mikola's return." And Melania is here too, holding to the husk of Mikola, dreaming and waiting for Mikola to return, and believing full well that he will.
Corpse after corpse left in my wake as I awaited his return.
Melania's set
don't we
reveals
just
that
go
she
get him?
believes her brother will keep his promise. So what was that promise, I wonder? Was it merely to return, or was it something more? How much does Melania know? Why did she fight Radahn? We'll have to talk about all of that in another video. So there is still faith.
I mean, I think her fight with Radahn happens even in the opening cinematic. Even I've seen that. And we've probably seen that several times during Vaati's video. And I'm sure, like, given Melania's thing, that the only reason she would move was for Mikola's sake, to achieve Mikola's goals, which was to establish the ideology, to bring back Godwin? There's a lot of things that it could be.
There's even this one phantom in the consecrated snowfields who has somehow puzzled out who took Mikola, and even where they are, he is pointed towards the portal that takes you to Mohgwyn Palace and Mohg the Omen. So
why did
indeed
Mohg
it
take
was
him?
the demigod Mohg who somehow broke into the Halig tree and absconded with Mikola's infant form.
Somehow broke into the Halig tree, got past Melania, and took him. Like, what? How powerful is Mohg?
And it's with him that the story ends. Or maybe it's where this story truly begins.
Here we go. Alright. What's your deal, Mohg?
So, if you're not familiar, Mohg is the Omen son of Godfrey and Marika, and being an omen of royalty, he was born into a wretched mire of filth in the subterranean shunning grounds below Lanedale capital. But unlike his brother Morgoth, who reviled his accursed blood, Mohg reveled in it. And it was assumedly because of this accursed blood that he chanced a meeting with an outer god called the Mother of Truth. And as Mohg stood before her, deep underground, his accursed blood erupted with fire, and he was truly besotted with the defilement that he was born into. Mohg is just one of many characters who discovers a new identity in the ways that they have been discarded by the world. And how could he not? For his defilement was validated by nothing less than an outer god. As always, we know very little about this outer god. We know she is called the Mother of Truth, and the formless mother. We know that she desires wounds and bestows power upon accursed blood. Her followers can thrust their arms into her body to scatter blood flame, and followers of Mohg can share in the Lord of Blood's power and send blood flies before them. There's even been some speculation in my recent shorts and my TikToks as well that the Formless Mother is also an outer god called the Bloodstar. But the one thing that all outer gods seem to have in common is that they all require vessels to move through. So in this case, the Formless Mother's vessel was Mohg. For example, the sacred spear that he wields is a weapon.
Okay, never
it's
mind.
also an instrument of communion. And
I was going with that in a
Mohg
different
may
direction.
well be doing her bidding with his actions. These actions included him starting a new dynasty called Mohgwyn, deep below the earth, in the grounds of these ancient dynastic remains. This is a secret place, difficult to reach, and it was here that Mohg brought the infant Miquella, torn as he was from his cocoon. I mean, that's how we see him in his opening cutscene, but in-game, Miquella seems to be back with a new cocoon here. You can even see it sat upon this giant pelvic bone, which seems to be a reference to the womb of the Halig tree woman that he was literally ripped from. And it's from the remembrance of the Bloodlord that we can learn of Mohg's intent here. He wished to raise Miquella to full godhood and become his consort, taking the role of monarch. To this end, Mohg...
Consort? Wait. Okay. English isn't really my first language. Give me one second. Am I understanding this right? Consort. A wife, husband, or companion, in particular the spouse of a reigning monarch. Mohg? Do you have something to say? Oh, man. Okay. I see. I guess I shouldn't be surprised when it comes to the Dark Souls series. Now I finally understand Maxor's jokes about it being incest. Oh, God, Mohg, what have you done?
Has begun soliciting blood offerings to Miquella, and that certainly explains the state of so many who reside here. According to the Lord of Blood's exaltation talisman, he proclaimed, "Render up your offerings of blood to your lord, drench my consort's chamber, slake his cocoon's thirst. His awakening shall herald the dawn of our dynasty." And then, to return to Mohg's remembrance, it's stated that, so far, this has all been in vain, for no matter how much of his bloody bedchamber Mohg tried to share, he received no response from the young Empyrean. So maybe nothing will happen. Or maybe, according to the Pure Blood Knight's medal, it is not yet time, for Mohg yet slumbers beside the divinity. Be patient, the new dynasty is nigh. What do you think? I mean, it's kind of hard to know. Even Gideon has no clue. But something does seem to be happening to Miquella in there. He has clearly grown, for one, since being taken, so maybe his adult form is manifesting. And personally, and this is really speculation, but this reminds me a lot of Berserk, which we know Miyazaki is always inspired by. Spoiler warning, really, you should watch that show, but there's this moment at the very end of the first...
Read it. Do not watch it. Whatever you do, if you see CGI Berserk, stay far, far away from it. I think there was like the old anime series and the movies, which were kind of okay. But if you see CGI, don't stay away from that.
Chapter where Griffith betrays his companions in this sacrificial ceremony of carnage and bloodshed in order to be inaugurated and reborn as a god within an egg of sorts. This
so is that potentially what Moog is trying to achieve? I mean, Moog and his blood and his outer god's blood could potentially make that happen.
Really reminds me of that. It also reminds me of a scene with Griffith where he allows himself to be abused, basically, in order to get what he wants. So
I see. I remember that scene. Yeah, that's a good way to kind of skirt around the actual details of that event.
I wonder, what if this was also what Mikola wanted? We know that he is extremely proficient at compelling others to love him, and Moog is clearly enraptured.
Yeah.
We know that Mikola is an Empyrean prodigy, and we know that his sister, who knows him best, has total faith that he will return. So you'd think he's still in control of the situation somehow. But that could be a part of the tragedy, and Mikola, this benevolent being, might not have predicted this at all, and is now being completely taken advantage of.
Is this really potentially like a big brain play from Mikola to get the adult body that he always wanted? Wait, did he want it? I don't know. And I forgot about that detail to consider here, that Mikola is just so good at charming people, making them basically do his bidding. Even to the point where, Melania just sits there forever waiting. Was it Mikola who told her? Is that all part of the promise? Is it all according to Keikaku? The implications of this are pretty crazy. And this is, I don't know anything about the DLC once again, but like potentially leading into a completely different ending.
Or maybe he did intend to be taken, but he's going to get more than he bargained for with the Mother of Truth. Or maybe Mikola's fate really is long gone. There's one other thing I want to mention. There is this place called Mikola's Hideaway in the Altus Plateau, and here we can loot Amber Starlight, which Celovus mentions is the very fate of a demigod. Clearly, since it's here, you'd think it's Mikola's fate, right? And then you also have to consider that the cut content that we are basing so much of this video on is very much removed from the game, because it might not fit the developer's intent. That's always possible. So I really do hope you all bear that in mind, as I would really hate to promote ideas that are against the developer's vision for this character. But I really do think that it's a possibility that we're going to one day enter the dream of this slumbering demigod. After all, there was once a cut character called Rico who was supposed to say the following, standing before Mikola's cocoon at Mogwin Palace. He says, "Finally, I have found it. St. Trina's Mikola's cadaver, such that I may aid you, O Lord. So please, I hope you welcome your humble servant Rico into your dream, the world of your heart. Indeed, I beg you grant my wish, that when you transcend from Empyrean to God, allow me a place by your side."
That is like perfect setup for a potential boss fight in a dreamscape against St. Trina or Mikola, who are probably just one and the same.
Plus, if we do get DLC, it's going to need a new Great Rune to acquire, right? That's a huge gameplay mechanic in these games, and it'd be weird if DLC came and you couldn't get more Great Runes. Apart from Mikola's Great Rune, the only one we don't know about also is Rani's Great Rune, which was allegedly cast aside. So there's always that to consider. But hopefully we get some DLC to answer these questions. Or more likely, we'll get DLC that will give us more questions than we started
probably.
with. That's always how it seems to go. But I really hope they throw us some good curveballs with this one, as they always do. But regardless, it's always a ton of fun to speculate with you all, so if you're still listening to this extremely long video, thank you for giving me your time today. Thank you to Quaylarg for reviewing the script for me. Thank you, Miss Pap, for the incredible visuals, as always. And I also want to give a sincere and really reverential shout out to Eugenia Lysa, who created the speculative visuals of St. Trina. Please follow her work in the description. She's one of the most talented artists that I've ever known. And yeah, thank you, as always, of course, for watching my videos, and I'll see you next time.
Another amazing video by Vaati. Please make sure to go and support him. He does incredible work. I personally want to subscribe to the idea that this was all according to plan from Miquella's side, but given how the world of Elden Ring has kind of been presented to me, I feel like there's also going to be some sort of twist to make things super tragic. I mean, the relationship and Miquella as a person appears to be like incredibly wholesome and probably like one of the only good things. So yeah, it's kind of there, it's kind of set up to end tragically, potentially. Regardless, let me know what your theories are, or if there's been more updated information about Miquella in particular. I do learn most of the lore from the reading the comments, so that would be extremely helpful. Thank you so much for watching, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one.